you've seen now sort of three visions of urban living and how buildings of different style will fit into the urban environment. So we're going to throw it open for questions, and we've got a roving mic at the end, and we've got somebody who's grabbed it already. So put your hands up if you want to speak, and we'll figure out who's next.
Thanks very much for all of your presentations. I'm James Perrick with City Planning in Toronto. I also chair the Urban Habitat and Urban Design Committee, and one of our interests is the spaces in between tall buildings, and you all demonstrated and showed really remarkable spaces. My question is if you can comment, particularly Mr. Mori, on the value that those spaces, the art, culture, the greenery, at the base, for example, of Roppongi Hills, provides to the development as a whole.
Yeah, I showed my picture, and the greenery area is a very common greenery area, is one good element. But not only greenery area, but also some public facilities like arts and hospitals and schools and libraries, or some cultural facilities is also important. So the key is what makes the city or the site more attractive is my conclusion is a multifunction. So many functions are located in the same area. So it's this is improves the site attractiveness.
Hi, Terry Boak. I'm on the Hike Committee for CTBUH. I had the pleasure this August of completely walking all around Roppongi Hills, Arc Hills, Toronto. It's absolutely an exquisite development, and I commend you. I want to know, and I think as we go from city to city, how we maintain people's safety and security. Because I think what is possible in Tokyo in terms of the intense vegetation, the little narrow winding paths that go through the development, and I felt perfectly safe walking female all by myself. There are places in the world where you cannot provide that kind of space because people wouldn't feel safe. And I wonder how the panel looks at sort of the international context, city to city competing with city, and how we address public safety to make these kinds of spaces possible.
Well, let me just state this. You can't have safety just by building a nice place. You can have a nice place which is very unsafe. I've been to many of them. Beautiful places and cities, beautifully designed, but you wouldn't want to be there. Whether in mega cities which are complex and have different forces. So to me, your question is very important because to me it's not a question of aesthetics or security. It's a question of society. If a society is democratic and doesn't create ghettos which are safe, but welcomes the strangers, welcomes the foreigners, welcomes the weirdos, it's a safe city. That's New York. When I grew, really, there were times when I grew up in the Bronx where much of Manhattan was not accessible because it was dangerous. There was a policeman on every subway in 1962. So it's not about how beautiful, and Manhattan is beautiful, really. I think it's more about worrying about what are we thinking in a larger picture. Ground Zero was a very good example of the safest city in the world, one of the safest cities in the world, Lower Manhattan, attacked suddenly and in a devastating way. Now, you can think that there are military answers to this conundrum. There are, we can see them, they're developing. You can see political, strategic transformations of the world. But at the end, it's really about how a city is an open city. And really, there are cities in Europe that I've been, there are very famous cities where areas are suddenly no-go areas because it's dangerous to go to certain areas of these cities today because of various problems, social problems. So to me, it's really a social question. It's not a question of nice space. Although I have to say, Tokyo is very safe. It's got nice spaces.
Any more questions? I've got one for Daniel. So you've seen the last presentation talked about designing the building from the inside for looking out as opposed to the outside looking in. Can you just explain how much that influences your work in terms of meeting the demands of both the external view as well as the internal view?
Well, that was a very instructive presentation. Of course, you would have to be an idiot not to design a space that works from the inside. But that's not the only thing that you need. You need the exterior, which communicates before you even enter the building. Even if you never enter the building, and it's just somewhere in Roppongi Hills, and you see the Mori building, you know it's a building of certain power, certain quality, art. So I think it's like the human body. You can't separate the skin and the way the physiognomy of a face from the soul, and one is not translatable to the other. You can have a beautiful face and a criminal, or or the other way around. You can be looking really, really bad, but have a soul of a poet. So yeah, that's how I look at buildings. I think the buildings have to be designed in a more complicated way. I don't think it's either from the inside or from the outside. It's from somewhere else. I would say that's that's the point. It's not to design it from in my opinion. It's not about the inside and it's not about the outside. It's somewhere else.
Yes, my question goes to Daniel Libeskind. You have the many projects globally, Europe to New York to South Korea. I'm sure when you design buildings in different places, I'm sure you respect their cultures and the people there as well. So I would like to know, when you design the buildings in Busan, I'd like to know what kind of special attentions or additional consideration you have in your mind practicing in Korea.
Well, you have to be interested in the culture of a place, and you have to really you have to get to know the place itself more than just from Google Earth. You can't just sort of fly around and discover the site and know how big it is. You have to have some relationship and some love for a tradition in which the building is standing. And every place that I've worked, and from Africa to South America, North America, Asia, every place, no matter how well known, there is an aspect of it that isn't so well known. This is what I call the tradition. It's not what you can get in a library or in an archive or in just some obvious way by clicking on info. It's some other kind of information you need. You need to meet people. You need to put your head into the ground. You need to stare at some wall, that will tell you more than any historian will tell you. So I don't know how to define this method. It's not, everybody has to have their own method, but I certainly think there's a limit to the objective methods that we have to analyze what a city is, because a city also has secrets. I think every city, and we as dwellers of cities, know the secrets of a city. That's why I think always the stranger designs the best building in a city. That's why cities that have no strangers design boring cities. Because only the stranger knows really what the city has. Because to me, that's the mark of the stranger, the other, the one who is not really part of that scene. I think that's an old kind of wisdom. In India has the story, the Jews have the story, Islam has the story, almost every great religion has the story that it's only the stranger who can tell you where to go, what to do. So I'm really, I call for strangers to design. Really, the people who have not been invited here.
I have a question. I am from Africa. To Daniel, also the projects you showed us in Milan, in New York, in Korea. Beautiful projects, wonderful expressions, and the thing though, the thing that stands out is the skin, the envelope, the glazing. Is this? It does relate to the previous question. They are similar. They're obviously different technologies. I don't know the technologies, but they're similar. So it then arrives in its on its site, and the similarity is what I'm questioning. Is that explored? Is that exploration far enough? Because the skin is similar. New York.
Sure. I mean, I think we work with sustainability as our criteria for buildings. The kind of glass or the kind of metal or concrete you use depends on where you are, what are the conditions. Depends also on the economics of the building. You know, I only once had a chance to, because the client was very wealthy, gave me titanium to do a building, except to work with the titanium was millions more than the budget allowed. I finally built the Denver Art Museum in titanium, but believe me, it was a headache getting such an expensive material. So you're right. We have to, you know, the industry is global. You know, we're building in Singapore, many, you know, whole communities, but they're built by companies from China, for example, which have their, so it's not so much about the material itself, it's how does the material perform? How does it, what is it? I mean, personally, I like buildings that look very, very slick on the outside, that are cold, very warm on the inside. They have a very nice atmosphere on the inside, but I like cold buildings. I don't like warm, you know, buildings, like looking nice. I like cold buildings, but I like the interior to be very, very emotional, very soft. So it's also preference of architects. Different cultures maybe have different preferences. But you know, I was astonished, Mr. Mori, by your graph about Japan, about diversity, because everybody I know, and my son, who is an astrophysicist, was just in Tokyo for a conference and for a wedding, and he said, you know, I wish the whole world looked like Tokyo, because it's, but you know, it's fantastic because diversity. What does diversity mean? It's related to the industry. What materials can we develop that give us the performance abilities, and can we build, you know, a skyscraper out of wood? I tried, but it doesn't work. It's you know. So sure, it's a great question, but I think the world is more alike than is different. We are working in Africa as well, and same issues come up. You know, what is the cost of the material? How is the material perform? Who's going to produce the material? Where is it going to come from? And how good is the building going to be with it? But it's both industry and of course aesthetics and preference of the client, preference of people. I don't know whether I explained. It's a hard question to answer.
So maybe we could follow on from that. If Mr. Mori, could you tell us a little bit about what the majority of the Japanese want in terms of diversity? Is it diversity of place? Is it they're looking for parks and shops? And is it diversity of building shapes? Is it diversity of what do you think people are looking for?
That question area is not general diversity, but for the real answer should be not hardware, like a design or building design or something, but also but some everybody from the worldwide can enjoy and can feel comfortable because of the diversity means, I think, acceptable accept everything. Yeah. So it means accept, so people can feel happy when you are accepted by the surrounding. So I think it's my understanding, but that question area was not specified diversity, but general diversity. Okay.
Yeah, I'm Junpala Fox from Manila. Following David's comment, were your respondents young generation or the old generation for your survey? Yeah, it makes a lot of difference because you have an aging population. Yeah.
I think for young generation is more open has an open mind, so they have a more diversifying capability.
Thank you. Maybe I just make a comment. And thank you for the great sharing. Well, maybe take-home value for all of us here is new dimensions. People first, or social equity, the environment or planet Earth. Then we can talk about profit or prosperity. Other dimensions were art, culture, history. And the quotation from St. Augustine, spirituality. I think in different hierarchy, you guys have achieved them. And thank you for sharing your great experience.